Now, President Trump revealed that he's very angry after President Putin criticised the credibility of Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky. He also threatened to impose 50% tariffs on countries buying Russian oil if Putin didn't agree to a ceasefire deal. Let's get reaction. Former US National Security Advisor to former President, to President Trump in his first term, John Bolton is with us. A very good morning to you, Ambassador. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning. Glad to be with you.
Great to see you here in person in particular. So, was this a significant change in tone from the President overnight to be as overtly critical of the Russian President as he has been, I guess, in past of the Ukrainian President?
Well, it's a blip, certainly. I've seen reports that attribute it to the fact that earlier that day he had played golf with Finland's President Stubbs, who had given him a report of from the European perspective of how the negotiations were going. But after the clip you just played, Trump, speaking to another media outlet, said he really believes Putin wants peace. This is just Trump responding as he responds to most things, ad hoc, episodic, not thinking about what comes next. He said 50% tariffs on Russian oil. Tomorrow he could say 100. The day after that, no tariffs.
So overall, stepping back from it in the last month or two, do you think there's method behind the madness? It's a phrase we've used a lot as it relates to his dealing with Ukraine, Russia, or not?
No, look, he doesn't do strategy. He doesn't have a philosophy. He doesn't really do policy the way we conventionally understand that term. What he wants is to put the Ukraine war behind him. He said repeatedly that during the campaign last year, it never would have occurred had he been president. And a few weeks ago, Vladimir Putin agreed with that, which is the beginning of the manipulation campaign to show just how smart Trump is. And he wants it behind him so he can do other things like raise tariffs and cause economic disruption.
I mean, you know better than most that in order to get to a peace deal, there's going to have to be something that President Putin can frame as a win for himself domestically. I mean, is a lot of that strategically why we hear what we hear from President Trump, from Steve Witkoff, from others? And is there sensibility behind that, or do you disagree with that approach?
Yeah, I do disagree with that. Witkoff knows nothing. In fact, he's more of a propaganda vehicle for Putin than anything else, conveying, for example, Putin's line that the Ukrainians inside Kursk province were completely surrounded, which turns out not to have been true. But that's what Putin told Witkoff. Witkoff told that to Trump, and Trump then said it publicly. I think Putin has already received enormous concessions from Trump, conceding that the U.S. is not pushing for full restoration of Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity, no NATO membership, no NATO security guarantees, in effect, no U.S. security guarantees. What Putin has to be careful of is not pushing Trump too far that he jeopardizes those concessions. But I think Putin believes he can get more concessions, particularly regarding NATO itself.
Is President Trump, and I guess some of the members of his top team that you probably know quite well, genuinely anti-China? And if so, is there an emboldening of China that goes on whilst essentially, as you say, kind of softening the position on Russia? Or are they two completely distinct issues?
Well, almost everything is a distinct issue for Trump. On China, he blames China for costing him the 2020 election. The COVID virus came out of China. The U.S. economy was in good shape. COVID obviously sent it over the edge of a cliff, and Trump lost. But Trump also wants the biggest trade deal in history with China, which would be enormously useful for him in making his reputation. There are times, like on the current trip of Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, where he's telling Japan, we're strongly behind you, China's a big threat. But that could change in a heartbeat if Trump thought he could get Xi Jinping into negotiations.
What do you think the message of the Trump presidency this time around so far will have been to Xi Jinping? Is it that President Trump is going to be tough on them? Or, in fact, will U-turn and soften depending on what sort of short-term gain there could be for President Trump?
Well, it's interesting. In the first 2 months, he's actually been fairly soft on China. He has imposed tariffs. China has reciprocated. But there's no exchange of hot rhetoric, as there is with some of our actual friends in the world. And the tariffs on Canada and Mexico are higher than the tariffs on China. We'll see what happens on Liberation Day, as Trump calls it, April the 2nd. But I think the prospect is pretty pretty depressing in the sense that we could be in a global trade war fairly quickly.
What is your kind of assessment of how resolute the president is this term compared to the one where you were working so closely with him? I mean, just looking at the markets, the Nikkei's down 4% this morning. European markets are down 1%. US markets are down some 20% from their highs. And he's seemingly going ahead with tariffs still. Is that a different, more resolute President Trump than the first term, or do you think it's similar?
Well, I think it's even more chaotic than the first term, but he's hearing from more advisors now telling him tariffs are a great thing. I think he's in dangerous political territory in the United States. In the past few days, he said he doesn't care if automobile prices go up as a result of tariffs. Well, tell that to American voters who are looking to get a new car and are going to find it thousands of dollars more expensive, or what the prices may be on other consumer goods that are affected as tariffs add to the cost of those goods. The markets have not affected Trump, which people say he follows very carefully, which is an interesting data point. But what really could begin to get his attention if Republicans start losing key elections around the country, and if the prospects for the midterm congressional elections in 2026 look bad for Republicans.
Do you think he cares about that as much as last time? I mean, it brings the sort of final topic, given something he said over the weekend, but he hasn't got another election to face this time round. Do you think that makes him more resistant to short-term pressures than it would otherwise? And do you believe in any way that he actually will try and seek a third term?
Well, I think he's trying to have it both ways. I think it's correct, as you say, that not having to face the voters again, he doesn't feel the constraint of electoral pressure. But the people who do are Republicans in Congress who have to go up for re-election in the House, all of them, and one-third of the Senate next year. What Trump is saying in terms of a third term is absolutely wrong constitutionally. Under his theory, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, and Bill Clinton are also eligible to run again in 2028, that it's only 2 consecutive terms the Constitution bars, in his view.
But he's not going to be allowed to do that.
Well, I think it would be a disaster for the country to have to go through it, but I think enough states would bar him from getting on the ballot. He couldn't constitutionally win, and ultimately the case would get to the Supreme Court. The question is how quickly.
Crazy that we're even talking about it. Just finally wanted to ask about kill switches in the F-35. Sufficient discussion on it that the former Danish defence minister said he regrets that he led the country towards a path to buy the F-35. The UK seemingly is going to continue with having the F-35 amongst its air force. Is that a reasonable response, or is it now dangerous for countries to buy American-made equipment?
No, I don't think it's a reasonable response, and I do think Europe has to be careful here. That kind of rhetoric, we've seen other kinds from the incoming German chancellor, where he said Germany wanted independence from the United States, gives Donald Trump a permission slip to withdraw from NATO. This is a huge mistake. I'm not defending Trump in any way, but I think Europeans and other allies around the world need to be careful not to make it worse.
Just finally, Keir Starmer, do you think he's doing a good job where he can with President Trump, all things considered, whether it's trade, whether it's defence?
Well, I think he's off to a good start. I think the invitation by King Charles for a state visit's an excellent idea. I never saw Trump happier than at Buckingham Palace in his white tie for the dinner with the Queen on that state visit. Of course, that card really only applies once, and now he's played it. I don't know if Keir Starmer plays golf, but I'd advise him to take it up if he doesn't.
Ambassador, great to have you with us, particularly in person. Thanks so much for stopping by.
Thank you.